Howdy. Welcome back to Dion Talk. Today's video, I have my friends Matt, the lumberjack landlord here, and Michael Zuber, author of One Rental at a Time. And I figured since both of them are, in my own words, more successful than I am, Michael is much more educated than I am. I would like to figure out how three different investors look at their rental properties and actually how they calculate a cash-on-cash return. What are the numbers that you look at to find out if a property is worth making an offer on? Just the math part, not all of the things that we follow up with. Let's start with Matt, the lumberjack landlord. What are the numbers that you look at?
The main pieces that I look at are obviously principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, that pity method. And so I look at all of those factors. And then also what my down payment is going to take in a deal. So this is where we talk a lot about having that first time investor, the first 10 times investing, taking advantage of the 3.5% FHA or 5%, conventional or 10% conventional. I can't get that once you get over 10 properties, you can't get that. And so we're looking at everything that I make an offer on is at least 25% down. So I have to account for that 25% down deposit, as well as what those monthly payments are to figure out what my return on that capital is going to be. That's basically what I do. Is if I look at $100,000 property and I figure I have to put 25% down, that I owe $75,000 on it. And then I look at what my monthly nut's going to be between principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, and then something small for maintenance because I self-manage as well. So I don't have to worry about a fee being taken out.
So the principal, pretty easy to run it through a mortgage calculator. I guess the interest too, but the taxes and insurance, how are you finding that?
If it's not listed yet, you can look at the MLS sheet. A lot of times they list it there. I always call the town to verify because I've seen some massive mistakes made there in MLS where they put the wrong number. They just weren't paying attention and they put the wrong number down. And then that's on the taxes piece. So I'll call and follow up with that. And then on the insurance side, I have 2 insurance brokers that I use, and I always tell them I'm dialing for dollars. So if you pick up my phone, if you pick up your phone, you get my business. If you don't, and I go to voicemail, I got to wait. So I always just have a quick call with them and say, hey, the core of what I look at is what I'm going to be out of pocket, and then what I'm going to be out of pocket monthly thereafter, because I have to make my nut.
And I think the only thing that's missing from that calculation is how are you estimating what the rents are going to be on the properties you're acquiring?
That's a great question. And if one were to take Mike's One Rental at a Time course, that is actually something I cover in my house hacking section. Nice. And so, so I actually look at 3 areas. So I look at Craigslist, because around us, predominantly Craigslist is used for rentals. I will look at, because we have a lot of college kids and we have a lot of 20 somethings. And so they use that a lot. Apartments.com, I'll look at just for reference. MLS I'll also look at, but usually that's for reference. And then every once in a while, I'll just pick up the phone and call a couple of brokers that I know that are rental brokers and just say, hey, call it, right? And then based on kind of the amalgamation of all of those numbers, that's where I come up with, okay, this is about where I'm going to be. And I feel comfortable with that number.
And I think for people watching, when you were starting, these are a lot of numbers to run through. But as you've been investing for a while, since you focus on, I think you said you're in 3 towns.
Yes.
You know pretty much what the rents are going to be. You know what the taxes, the insurance, and all that's going to be. So you make a decision to make an offer or not in minutes.
Yes.
When you see a deal hit your awareness, right?
Yep. And like we always talk about, landlording and what we do is a skill. So this can absolutely be learned. But that's the advantage that I have, is that I can walk a property and I can also know if there's $15,000 worth of repairs that need to be done. I actually know that it's 15. I know how fast I can get it done. And so I can do all that stuff literally on the fly. That's why 90% of the time I don't pay for inspectors either, because I'm looking for all that stuff. So when I've actually walked that property, I know exactly what the number needs to be. And then it becomes getting it to that number as best we possibly can.
And that's what's hard for a lot of new investors is they want to compare their start with our end, where it's super easy for us to look at a deal and they're still going through the learning process. So let's turn it over to somebody who has been investing a bit longer and has a bigger portfolio and more education. Mike, how do you figure out your cash on cash return, or what you call your yield?
Yeah, for me, yield is the only decision I use. It's the only thing I have. So a couple of things I want to point out before we get into the math. I use yield to compare 1 bedroom, 1 bath houses that are 500 square feet with 20 unit apartment buildings. I do not have a calculation for houses and another one for apartments. You will hear people in the business talk about cap rates. because they want to sound smart. And then, minimum cash flow numbers or some other metric for houses. I think that is an idiotic move because they both take cash and they both produce cash flow. So I don't understand the mental gymnastics that people try to force on you when they're talking multifamily versus houses. I do not do that. I have the same spreadsheet, the same formula for everything, and I will simply buy the highest yield. So that's the first caveat. Second caveat, what is not included, I never look at, even though it can happen. Appreciation. I never look at appreciation. The fact that we joked earlier, the only time I look at it is when I have to fill out a financial statement. It's not important. Anything I buy, I assume I'm going to own till I'm dead. As people know my story, I will obviously sell when people want to overpay, but I don't count appreciation. Second, some people, when they're talking cash on cash, and that's why I use the word yield, not cash on cash, they talk about a discount at purchase. I bought it for $20K under value, and they want to use that in the calculation of cash on cash. And I think that is a slippery slope, dangerous, because what you think is a $20K difference, I think it's a $20K overpay. And I don't care, right? I may know I got a great deal, but I've seen great deals lose money, right? So I don't count discounts. And I take the whole principle, right? I have seen some other people make calculations where they only take the interest of your monthly payment. Like, the payment's $1,000 and 200 of that's principal. They don't count the 200. I'm like, why would you do that? Because it still comes out of my account. I don't get it. It's a forced savings, sure, but I want to count all of that. So those caveats before I go through this, and that's why I call it yield. So it's simply division. There are two numbers. So in a division, there's something called the numerator and the denominator. So the denominator is perhaps the easiest thing to understand or the most simple. It is what cash comes out of my accounts to buy the asset and make it rent ready. Simply speaking, there typically are three categories. There's my down payment, and I've done as little as 0 down up to 35% down. Depends on the deal, depends on what I'm doing. Then there's closing costs. Everything I've ever closed has had thousands of dollars in closing costs. It's, again, cash that comes out that I want to include. And then the big one is what I call make ready. Because I ended up doing this because I was buying junk in the beginning and then wondering where all my money went. It's because I was buying junk and I had to repair them to make it rent ready, right? It's one thing to buy a house empty at a great deal, but if you don't include the 40 grand it takes to make it rent ready, what have you really done? So for me, the denominator is those three numbers: your down payment, your closing cost, and your make ready. Does that make sense, Dion?
Yeah, so far I'm tracking.
Okay. Then the other thing in the division is called a numerator. So my numerator is my expected yearly cash flow. The expected yearly cash flow is basically a monthly calculation times 12. The monthly calculation is rent, right? Rent minus all expenses, full mortgage payment, full taxes, insurance. I do have a property manager, unlike Matt. Reserves for bad debt, reserves for maintenance, all reserves for those things. But my reserves for repairs is not as high as many, because remember, what do I do first? I do all my make ready up front. So if I had an end of life water heater, as in Matt's example, I would replace it, and I would take the $1,400 it takes, and it would be in my denominator. That allows me to push off lots of capital investments for years, if not decades to come. So again, it would be rent minus all expenses. That produces a cash flow number for the month. You take that monthly number times 12, because there's 12 months in a year. That then becomes a numerator. With your denominator, you perform that math. It turns into a decimal point. If you want to turn it into a percentage, you multiply it by 100%. But in the end, it becomes a yield, right? It's like a bond. I'm taking $12,500 out of my account, and it's producing some kind of yield, right? So every property to me is nothing but a bond. So that's how I do the calculation. And again, I will buy the highest yield. And in my market today, houses have a higher yield than multifamily.
A blend of what you guys are talking about. And this is going to be a great exercise for me, because I have two people with more experience that you can give me feedback on this.
Uh-huh.
When I'm doing my cash on cash return, my goal isn't to find out how much money I'm going to make. My goal is to come up with a system where I can look at different properties and compare apples to apples.
Sure.
So if I'm buying this property with a 20 or 25% down payment, but I'm house hacking this property and I purchased a duplex with a 5% down payment, I would calculate my cash on cash as though I always level it out like I did a 20% down, so that I'm looking at the numbers comparing the properties, not what's actually coming out of my pocket like you do, Mike. You're looking at exactly what you spent. I'm looking at if I spent 20% down to purchase this property, and it's after a year from now when I'm no longer renting one of the units. So the units would be rented out. And then I would find the area average rents. And in the past, it's been pretty easy. I would use Craigslist, Cozy, and call the housing authority. But this year, rents are going up so fast that the housing authority is lagging behind. But Mike talked about in one of our other videos that more funds were just released to hopefully help that program. So I've used more heavily apartments.com and Craigslist to find current rents. But I do the same thing. My cash out of pocket to purchase it is closing costs and costs for immediate repairs. So age of the building could make that more, or if I know it needs a roof, that could make that more. But the down payment is the one thing I shift, where I always factor it like I did 20%, so that I'm looking at the properties instead of what I'm spending. Setting aside for repairs and vacancy. And I do recommend for somebody watching to factor in something for property management, even if you're like me and Matt, who are going to self-manage for a long time, because eventually that could be an expense. Do you guys see a flaw in the way that I'm looking at it?
I don't know. I think
I don't like it.
But not today.
Yeah, I don't like it at all, frankly. I don't like the apples to apples, because every deal is unique. Every deal should be looked at. Like if you were going to get a seller financing deal at some point and they were going to finance it for 10% down, why would you compare that to something? Why would you're basically trying to bring every deal to some kind of base level. And that's just not how I work. I'd love to get creative deals and love to do that. I don't know why
if you did a
that.
zero down and you only spend a few thousand on closing and a few thousand on repairs, so you're out of pocket $5,000 or $10,000.
Sure.
A 100% return might not be worth your time to manage that property. That's why I do that. I look at it like,
why wouldn't that? Wait, hold on. So let me say what I think.
Maybe it's a 20 unit property where you're making $10,000 a year.
Oh.
So you're like $5 to $10 a unit per month. I guess I didn't do the math very well. You need to make sure, if you do a VA loan, zero down.
Gotcha.
And you make $1 a year, that's not a good metric to say I've got a 1,000% return on my money or infinite. That's why I picked 20% as a metric. So maybe I just didn't explain it very well the first time around.
No, I mean, yeah, in the yield calculation, there are a couple things that are subtle in there. One is you do need to have a minimum number. Like I won't go below $100 because, somebody farts and breaks a window, the money's gone. So there's some of that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just, and again, I'm sure it's 100% a personal bias. I just want to know what money's going out, what money's coming in. And part of that's because I like creative deals and I've done lots of them, and it really encourages that behavior. But I mean, I get what you're doing.
No, it's actually something I took from Paula Pant, who has Afford Anything, basically a whole community.
Cool.
And we talk often about the flaws with the 1% rule.
God, yeah.
Is your property taxes $1,000 a year or 16? Do you have a $500 a month HOA or no HOA? So it's really flawed. The flaw with the cash on cash return or the yield method is if you're buying a $1 property, and I'll just pick Detroit because it's the only place I know where the car manufacturers moved out, properties tanked. If you buy it there, but you can't go collect the rents, 1,000% return on your money is not worth buying the property. So that's kind of where I came up with the idea. And
I get it. So that's good. Cool.
I like the normalization of it just because I've house hacked. So it's like, I wanted to know after I moved out after a year, what my real income was going to be. And so I see it. We certainly did that when we would evaluate a property to understand, okay, when we move out, what's going to be our return on capital when we move out? So I certainly see the normalization, certainly from the upfront buy perspective. So I don't hate it. I think it's something that it's something to consider, especially when the opportunity is there to hack, right? When the opportunity is there to hack, it's absolutely worth considering. Cool. What is this really going to make me when I move out? Because obviously when you move in, you're making $0 on that unit. And so that one unit, if it's a duplex, that one unit has to carry you, and taking 50% of your income out of any deal makes it look like crap.
Yeah.
Right.
So I get that. Yeah.
We did duplexes for a long time. So that's why I like just the opportunity to look at it and normalize it, because there were some properties that we couldn't move into because of X, Y, or Z. Like when we get down to a duplex, we couldn't go back up to a 3.
Mm.
That wasn't allowed by FHA standards at the time, and it's still not allowed now. In fact, now it's actually an effort to, that's why I came up with the 4-3-2-1 strategy. Yes, it comes down to what you're going to get, return on capital right up front, but also understanding, hey, after I move out of this a year from now, my return on capital is actually far greater in my house hack. Like that's why I like at least the consideration of it.
Yeah.
So let me point out something really important to the people watching this. When you have a mentor, what I just did with Michael Zuber, who is more educated, more successful, larger portfolio, more experience, right? Has all of these things. I had a concept that as a new investor, maybe I would be afraid to present because I know he would disagree with it. So I present the idea and hoping that he does what he did. Mike, devil's advocated. Here's why I see a problem with the way you think. And then I took the time to explain myself. If I can explain it simple enough to where it took about 4 minutes for Mike to kind of come around to, I wouldn't do that, but it seems to be working for you and I can see why, then it's a strategy I would continue to use. If you can't explain what you're doing simply enough for somebody who's been doing it longer and knows more, for them to see your point of view, you're the new person. You need to rethink what you're doing. And I would have if this conversation didn't go the way that it is now. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time to do this. We're helping the people watching. You helped me today. Until my next video, thanks for coming to my Dion Talk.
We're sorry, the number you have dialed is not in service at this time.